Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about something super important. Now, if you clicked on this video, it's for one of two probably different reasons. One of those being that you want to catch more fish, and the other of those being that you guys just support me, support my channel, and watch all of my videos, and if that's the case, then thank you. But so as you can tell by the title of this video, today we're going to be talking about tides. Now, I get a lot of messages on Instagram. If you're not following me on there, make sure you are. I'll pop it up on the screen right now, and it's always in the description of my videos. But everyone always asks me for more tip videos, and I'm in my new office today, and it's not the best day to go fishing, so I decided I'll make a tip video today. So some of you guys said that you wanted me to expand a little bit more because I do have a video already made about how to find spots to catch fish. Some people wanted to know about tides, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So when it comes to tides, I typically look at it as if there's like 3 different layers. And now I'll make a graphic in Photoshop or something, and I'll put it on the screen while I'm talking somewhere over the side. I don't know, wherever. I'll make a graphic. So I personally don't believe that there's that much of a difference, especially when you're inshore fishing. And that's going to be this whole video is primarily talking about redfish and snook because that's what I target the most. But I don't believe it matters if it's an incoming tide or if it's an outgoing tide. But what I think matters is where it's at in that tide. And that's what I mean when I say 3 different levels to it. So starting out at low. So we're talking the lowest tide possible. This is the time when you're going to be able to sight fish the best. Primarily in this time, I like to target some reds on the flats. And when you have a low tide, those fish get concentrated to one certain area because of the fact that the tide is not up, so they can't go push up deep into mangroves, deep into canals, deep into back pockets, whatever you want to say. They get concentrated out to those areas where there's still some water. Now also there's definitely a chance that you can find these fish farther deep back in the mangroves. If you go farther back in there, sometimes if you're on a kayak or a ginu, you might have to get out, drag it through there. But if you can find a deep pocket back there, those fish will be concentrated back there also because they're stuck. They can't go anywhere else. But sometimes that's just kind of a pain. I've done that many times where I've gotten out of my kayak and pulled it through the mud to find a deep pocket that I knew was in the back and I didn't catch anything. And when you go through that much effort to not catch any fish, it really, really sucks. So I typically don't really do that unless I know for a fact that like, hey, there's a deep pocket back in this area. There's 100% fish in there. It's like fishing in a barrel on low tide. I'm going to catch fish. But if it's a new spot and I just saw it on Apple Maps maybe, or I saw it one other day when I was out fishing and I'm like, damn, this might be a good spot during low tide. 9 out of 10 times I probably don't go there. I stick to just out in the flats, out in the bay where I know those fish are going to be concentrated at because of the tide being so low. Now let's talk about the middle. So let's say, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's incoming or outgoing, but I'm going to talk about incoming just for this example. Let's say the tide's incoming. We're fishing the flats at peak low tide at the lowest point of this tide, and that's when we were sight fishing on the flats for reds. Now that we're in the middle, this is going to be the best time when it comes to water movement and current. And so when the water's moving and you have a strong current, this is a good time to catch some snook. I believe that this is because of the fact that the tide and the current is flowing so much that these bait fish are out getting moved around. Crustaceans for reds, they're out getting moved around because this tide is at its strongest point throughout its let's say cycle. So at this point I will kind of push up with the tide. If I'm fishing out in the flat during low tide and I'm out there all day, as this tide comes in, I'm going to slowly also go in with the tide and start pushing up closer to those mangroves, but we're still not going to be up there super tight. And like I already said, I think this is probably my favorite time to catch snook. I think this is when I've caught the most snook. And then we'll talk about peak high tide. Once that tide, it doesn't even have to be peak. Just once that tide gets really high, close to peak, let's say maybe, 30 minutes to an hour before peak high tide and becomes slack, I personally don't like this time. Now, you can catch fish at any time of day, any tide, any current, any whatever. But I personally don't really try to fish the peak high tide because of the fact that there's so much water in, for example, the bay. I'm in the Tampa Bay area. Those fish have so many different places where they can go out and hide. With that tide being up, they can be pushed deep into some canals that I can't even get to and that are not accessible by a boat, kayak, ginu, john boat, etc. Or if they're not pushed deep in canals, sometimes they're just up super high in those mangroves and they don't want to come out of it. So it's not really possible to skip your lure under there. Whereas when you're in that middle point of that tide, like I said, my favorite time to really catch some snook, you can skip under those mangroves a little bit easier because there's going to be water under there, but the water's not going to be high enough to the point where it's like meeting the overhanging branches. Because once it gets to that high tide and it's meeting the overhanging branches, you might find like a pocket here or two that you can skip under, but for the most part, you're not going to be able to. And a lot of times those snook especially are very finicky and they don't want to come out. If that tide is up and they're pushed up deep in those mangroves, if you're casting just on the edge of those, they're not going to come out, especially if you're throwing artificial lures, which 9 out of 10 times I am personally throwing. If you're throwing live bait, that might be a little bit different, but I can't really speak too much for that because I don't really ever throw live bait. So that's pretty much it. I mean, tides, you know, you can take it into extreme depth and, you know, really research moon phases and pressure and all that stuff, but you're not going to catch fish if you're not out in the water. So if you're spending all your time planning out your trip, planning out the perfect day, you know, you're just not going to catch fish. Sure, there might be moon phases that are better. Sure, there might be, you know, different pressure levels that are better, conditions, whether it's windy, rough, calm, etc. But at the end of the day, the only way to catch fish and the only way for you to learn what the fish are like in your area is to get out there and fish. So I don't want to go in too much depth. I personally do look at a couple little more things when I'm picking out what days I want to go fish throughout the week. But for the most part, this is what I'm focusing on. The 3 levels of the tide. If I know it's a high tide super early in the morning, I'm not waking up super early to go out. I mean, maybe people say that you can catch the most fish super early in the morning, but if that tide is at peak high tide at like 6, 7 a.m., I'd rather sleep in till 9, 10 p.m. or 10 a.m., I'm sorry, till that tide is, you know, coming down a little bit and it's kind of in the middle, because that's when I personally have the most luck. And I think it's just easier because those fish are a little bit concentrated because of the fact that the tide is not super up and they can't get super close to those mangroves, but they can get up there a little, but not to the point where I can't skip under there. I feel like I'm very repetitive, but there's not much to it if you're just looking for the basics of tide. So, if you want to take a screenshot, I'll put the little image that I made while I was talking on the screen right now in full. Use this next time you plan on going fishing. Also, if you don't know how to check the tides, there are plenty of apps out there. There's websites out there. Don't pay for any. I paid for one when I first got into fishing because it said it was like the best, most accurate. That's not the case. They're all the same. Let me know down in the comments below what other tip videos you guys want to see. I talked a little bit about how to find spots in a previous video. Once again, that'll be linked in the description. Now we're talking about tides. Pretty soon I do want to make a video talking about what knots I throw. You can see my rods behind me. Pretty soon I'll be doing a rod setup tour, as well as just kind of like a whole office tour. I just moved into a house, and this is the first time I've had like a whole office dedicated to myself, so it's really cool. Not that you guys probably really care at all. Also, a couple other people have been asking for a kayak kind of setup tour, and a couple people have been asking for a john boat tour. The john boat that you guys have seen me fish recently is not mine. That's my buddy CJ's, and he's launching a channel very soon, so I don't want to make that video about his john boat before he does, so I'll let him make one first, and then maybe I'll make a video talking about his john boat setup. But overall, guys, tides matter, but not to the point where you should completely not go fishing because you think the tide's not going to be good. I primarily target that low tide and that middle point of the tide, and I try to stay away from high tide, but I've caught fish on high tide, and that's not me telling you that it's pointless. I appreciate everyone who took the time out of the day to watch this little tip video. You don't have to believe everything I say. I'm not by any means an expert, but I catch a decent amount of fish, and you guys have been requesting these tip videos, so I figured I'd make it. Leave a thumbs up. Comment down below, like I said, some other video ideas that you guys want to see, or if you want to add into what I said about tides, I'd love to hear from your personal experience. Maybe you have a complete opposite look on tides than I do, or maybe you agree with me. At the end of the day, fish are going to bite when they want to bite, so there's nothing we can do about that.